The morning started quietly, the kind of soft, calm morning where nothing seems out of place. The sun had barely risen, and the street was still empty, except for a few birds hopping along the sidewalk. In the middle of that stillness, the sound of metal clinking broke through the quiet. It was slight at first, barely noticeable, but it grew louder as someone moved closer to the driveway. The person inside the house, a calm and private man who preferred keeping to himself, heard it. At first, he thought it might be the wind or a loose tool shifting on his workbench. But the noise didn't stop. It grew sharper, like metal scraping against, metal in a way that didn't belong to the peaceful morning. He stepped toward the window and looked outside. His Jeep sat in its usual place, the same spot it always occupied, locked securely with a fixed steering lock. It was a dark-colored off-road Jeep, sturdy but not flashy. Something he took care of because it served a purpose beyond normal driving. Standing next to his Jeep was a woman from the neighborhood, someone he had dealt with before. She had a reputation on the street for being strict about rules, sometimes too strict. People whispered that she treated the neighborhood as if she personally owned it. She always carried a clipboard, always pointed out small issues, and never missed an opportunity to lecture someone about the rules she believed. The HOA should enforce. She never liked the Jeep. She always claimed it looked too rugged and didn't fit the neighborhood image. He had already tried explaining to her that the Jeep had permission to be there, and that he kept it in good condition. But she didn't care. She never wanted explanations. She only wanted control. Now, to his shock, she was crouched beside the Jeep, clearly trying to tamper with the steering lock. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She was pulling at it, shaking it, pushing tools into the small gap near the hinge. The cold morning air made the metal ring louder as she forced the lock back and forth. He stepped outside quickly, not running, but walking fast enough that she noticed him almost immediately. She stood up straight, holding a small metal tool in her hand, looking both annoyed and determined. She didn't look guilty. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she put her hands on her hips and spoke as if she were the one who had caught him doing something wrong. "You were supposed to move this," she said flatly. "It violates the neighborhood standard. I gave you plenty of warnings." He kept his voice steady. "This Jeep is allowed here. I told you that. You've seen the permission letter." She brushed that off with a wave of her hand. "That letter doesn't mean anything. The board didn't approve this. It's sitting out here like some kind of work truck. I told you the HOA would remove it if you didn't, so I'm taking care of it." He looked at the steering lock she had been twisting. It was scratched now, marked by whatever tool she had forced into it. He could see fresh metal where the paint had chipped. He felt a tightness in his chest, not anger exactly, but disbelief. Who breaks into someone's vehicle and acts like it's community service? "You can't touch my property," he said, still keeping his calm. "This isn't how the HOA works. You can't just come onto my driveway and break my lock." But she wasn't listening. People like her never truly listened. She only heard what she wanted to hear. "It's abandoned," she declared. "It's just sitting here. And your lock is a problem, too. It makes the neighborhood look unsafe." "This is not abandoned," he replied firmly. "I use it regularly." She shook her head, refusing to hear him. "You don't get to argue with me. I'm doing what needs to be done. If you won't move it, I will." Before he could answer, she bent down again and tried forcing the tool deeper into the lock. The metal screeched loudly, echoing down the street. He knew he needed evidence, so he took out his phone and began recording. The moment she saw the phone, her expression tightened, but she didn't stop. She just spoke louder, as though she wanted the recording to capture her confidence. "I am acting under HOA authority," she declared. "You've been warned multiple times. If you won't cooperate, I will remove the vehicle myself. But she didn't have any authority. Not the kind she was pretending to have. No HOA allowed members to forcibly break into someone's private vehicle. No HOA had rules that allowed someone to damage property. She kept twisting the lock until finally, with a rough snap and a metallic pop, she forced it loose. The steering lock dropped onto the seat inside, and the Jeep alarm chirped once sharp, piercing, and definitely not the sound of a normal car alarm. She froze mid-movement. The alarm wasn't the usual repetitive noise that echoed endlessly through neighborhoods. It was short, strong, and carried a different kind of weight, like something meant to alert the owner instantly. Inside the house, a small hidden device activated the moment the lock was broken. The man knew this alarm very well. It wasn't something he installed for decoration or extra security. It was part of the Jeep's special equipment, something he had agreed to maintain for a team that trusted him. Before he could even walk toward the door to check the alert, his phone vibrated. The number calling him was one he recognized. He answered immediately. A calm but firm voice on the other end said, "Is the vehicle compromised?" He took a breath and spoke quietly, not wanting the woman to overhear. "Yes, someone forced the lock open." "Stay where you are," the voice said. "We're coming right now." He hung up. The woman, noticing his serious expression, stepped closer with a smirk, as though she thought she had won something. "Who was that?" she asked. "The HOA office?" "I already told them I'm handling this." "It wasn't the HOA," he said. She scoffed. "What, then? A friend coming to help you?" "You don't scare me. This Jeep is a violation, and it's not staying here." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The situation was already moving beyond anything she understood. She had no idea what she had just broken into, and she still believed this was just a neighborhood argument. She didn't notice the way he kept glancing down the street, waiting. She didn't notice how nervous the silence around them suddenly felt. She didn't know that breaking that steering lock didn't just set off a noise. It sent a signal. She just stood there, arms folded, convinced she was in the right dot in that moment. He realized something. She didn't understand what she had done. She didn't understand what that Jeep really was, or why it had extra security. She thought she was dealing with a simple neighborhood dispute. She believed she had more authority than she truly had, and she had absolutely no idea who was now on their way. The quiet morning was about to change, and she was the only one who didn't see it coming. The moment the alarm echoed through the quiet neighborhood, everything felt different. The air seemed heavier, as if the morning itself understood something serious had just happened. The woman who had broken the lock didn't seem to notice this shift. She stood with her arms crossed, acting as though she had done something noble instead of something dangerous. The man stepped back toward his porch, not to hide, but to give some space. He knew what the alarm meant. He knew who had been alerted. He also knew it would not take long to arrive. The last time the alarm had been triggered, it took less than 10 minutes for someone to show up, and that was during a busy afternoon. This was a calm morning. It might be even faster dot. The woman watched him with a suspicious look, as if she thought he was planning something dramatic. She tapped her foot on the driveway, clearly impatient. "You can stop pretending," she said sharply. "Nobody is coming. I'm the one handling this." He didn't respond. Arguing wouldn't help anything now. The situation had moved beyond his words the moment she forced the lock open. She didn't know it, but she had just turned a simple neighborhood conflict into something much bigger. She walked around the front of the Jeep, looking at it with a kind of expression someone might use when inspecting something they believed they owned. She pressed her hand against the hood, nodded to herself, then reached for the door handle as if she wanted to climb inside. He stepped forward quickly. "Don't touch the inside," he said firmly. She pulled her hand back and glared. "You don't tell me what to do. This is an HOA matter now. You've ignored the warnings again and again. I gave you enough chances." He kept his voice steady. "This is not an HOA matter anymore. You broke the lock. There's damage now. You need to stop touching it." But she didn't listen. She never did. She pulled at the handle again, trying to force the door open, even though it was locked. "You're still making this difficult," she snapped. "Just open it. I need to check the interior. It might have things inside that break our community rules." He stared at her in disbelief. "It's my vehicle. You have no right to search it." She scoffed loudly. "If you had followed the rules, none of this would be happening." Before he could answer, the sound of an engine interrupted them. Not the friendly hum of a neighbor's car or the slow roll of a delivery van. This engine had a deep, steady tone, the kind that belonged to a trained driver in a well-maintained vehicle. It came from the end of the street. The woman turned around with an annoyed sigh. "Great. Now people are coming. They're going to think something is wrong just because you made a scene." But the man knew exactly what that sound meant. He turned toward the street and watched as a dark SUV came into view, moving faster than any normal neighborhood vehicle. It didn't have sirens on, but it didn't need them. The way it slowed near the driveway, the way it rolled to a stop without hesitation, it told him everything. The woman, however, didn't understand. Not yet. Another SUV followed the first, then a third. They lined up quietly along the curb. The neighborhood was still mostly asleep, but a few curtains were already shifting as people peeked outside. The woman frowned. "Who are these people? They can't park here without permission." He almost smiled at the irony. The first door opened, and a tall figure stepped out wearing a dark jacket with no bright markings. But the seriousness in his posture spoke louder than any badge. Another person stepped out behind him, then another from the second SUV. They walked toward the driveway as a unified group comb. Professional and absolutely focused. The woman stiffened, but tried to maintain her confidence. "Excuse me," she said loudly, stepping in front of them. "You can't just walk onto private property. This is an HOA area. If you have business here, you need to speak to me. I'm the one handling this situation." None of them looked impressed. One of the men glanced briefly at her, then looked past her toward the owner of the Jeep. "We got the signal," he said. "Is the vehicle secure?" The woman blinked in confusion. She turned toward the Jeep, then back at them. "Signal? What signal?" "This is a simple rule violation." He refused to move the Jeep. "I'm following HOA enforcement guidelines." The man ignored her. He stepped closer to the Jeep and examined the steering column. When he saw the broken lock sitting loosely inside, his expression tightened. "It was forced," the owner said quietly. Though the officers could clearly see that for themselves, the woman took a step forward again. "I didn't force anything," she lied. "That thing shouldn't have been on the vehicle anyway. It makes the neighborhood look unsafe. I was simply removing it so we could deal with the situation properly." One of the officers raised a brow. "You removed it?" She lifted her chin. "Yes, I'm responsible for keeping the street in order." The officer gave her a long, steady look, the kind of look that said he was trying to decide whether she realized how serious her words sounded. "You tampered with the security device?" he asked. "It was ugly," she snapped. "And unnecessary. We don't allow equipment like that." I told him multiple times to remove it. The owner stood quietly, letting the moment unfold. He had no reason to argue anymore. The truth was standing right in front of them, shining through every scratched mark on the metal. The officer stepped away from the Jeep and spoke to his team. "This is confirmed. Record the damage." document everything. One of them took photos. Another made notes. They moved with precision, as if they had done this hundreds of times. The woman's confidence finally cracked. She stared at them, unsure whether to be angry or frightened. "What are you doing? This is unnecessary. I already told you, this is an HOA issue." "It's not," one of the officers replied calmly. "This vehicle is part of an ongoing operation. Any tampering must be reported and reviewed." Her eyes widened. "An operation? What operation? He lives in a quiet neighborhood. There's no operation here." The first officer looked at her and spoke in a level voice. "This Jeep belongs to our division. It's used when needed, and it has specific protections in place." The woman took a step back. "What do you mean it belongs to you?" "It's parked in his driveway. It's maintained here," the officer explained. "With permission." She looked between the officer and the owner, her understanding finally starting to break through her stubbornness. So this is a police vehicle?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's a task vehicle," the officer corrected. "And you forced your way into it." She swallowed hard. No, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know. He didn't tell me that." The officer's tone stayed calm. "He didn't have to." The woman opened her mouth, but couldn't find anything to say. Her face slowly turned pale. For the first time that morning, she didn't seem sure of herself. The officer turned back to the owner. "We'll file a full report. We need your statement as well." He nodded. "Of course." The woman tried to interrupt again. "Wait, you're not blaming me, are you? This is all because he left the Jeep here. I was doing my duty. I was trying to enforce the rules." One of the officers looked at her without emotion. "Your duty doesn't allow you to damage property or break into secured equipment." People were peeking out from front doors now. Curtains shifted. Heads leaned out from porches. The quiet morning had become a silent audience. The woman backed up slightly, clutching her clipboard as if it could protect her. Her voice had lost its sharp edge. Now it sounded small. "I didn't know." She whispered. The officer didn't raise his voice. "He didn't need to. But you did it anyway." The street was quiet again, but not the peaceful kind of quiet from earlier. This was the quiet that came from shock, from realization, from a situation that had grown far beyond an argument about a parked Jeep dot, and for the first time, the woman finally understood that she was no longer the one in control of anything. The street stayed silent for a long minute, the kind of silence that holds its breath. The woman who had broken the lock stood frozen near the Jeep, her usual sharp expression replaced with a mixture of confusion and fear. She looked completely out of place now, like someone who had finally realized the ground beneath her wasn't solid. The officers continued examining the Jeep, checking the steering column and the dashboard, speaking quietly among themselves. Their calmness made everything feel even more serious. They didn't rush. They didn't argue. They just worked with a steady purpose, as if every second mattered. The man stood a few steps away, watching quietly. He didn't enjoy seeing anyone scared, not even someone who had just broken into his vehicle. But he also knew this was no longer something he could smooth over with a simple conversation. The moment she forced the lock open, the situation had crossed a line. One of the officers walked up to him with a small device in hand. It was the tracker they used to confirm the alert signal. "The alarm was triggered about 4 minutes before we arrived," the officer said. "Does that match what happened on your side?" He nodded. "She was forcing the lock before that." It finally snapped, and the alarm went off. The officer made a note. Was this the first time she tried to interfere with the Jeep? He hesitated. She's been complaining about it for a long time. She didn't like it parked here. But this is the first time she tried to break into it. The woman finally found her voice. "I was not breaking into anything," she said, though her voice cracked. "I was following procedure. The HOA allows me to inspect violations." Another officer turned to her. "Inspecting something is not the same as forcing it open." She clutched her clipboard tightly, like it was the only thing holding her together. "I didn't know it was some kind of police jeep." "If he had said something—" "He didn't need to," the officer cut in. "You have no authority to touch someone's vehicle, no matter what rules you think apply." Her face reddened. "I told him it violated our neighborhood guidelines. I sent notices. I warned him." "And he told you it was allowed," the officer said calmly. "He showed you documentation, didn't he?" She looked away, unable to deny it. The officer turned back to the owner. "We'll need your full statement. But first, we need to be sure the vehicle is still functional and nothing else was damaged." He nodded. "Of course." The officers moved to check the Jeep's interior next, using a small device to unlock it from the inside. The woman flinched when she heard the door click open. It must have felt strange, seeing a vehicle she thought she could control, now being accessed by people with actual authority. They opened the door carefully, checking the dashboard, the wiring, and the equipment hidden behind the panels. One of the officers spoke into a small radio to update someone on the other end. The woman couldn't stay quiet anymore. "Are you all serious? This is just a parked Jeep. It's not like I damaged anything important." Another officer stepped forward. "You damaged a secured steering device connected to law enforcement equipment. That's important." "But I didn't know," she repeated, her voice rising. The officer's reply was calm but firm. "You didn't know, but you still acted without permission." Her hands shook slightly. "I was just trying to make the neighborhood better." The man watched her with a mixture of pity and disbelief. She had spent so long trying to control everything that she never learned to stop when she didn't understand something. She always assumed she was right. One of the neighbors ventured outside, standing near his porch. Another neighbor peeked out from behind a fence. The woman noticed them watching, and her face tightened. She wasn't used to being on the wrong side of public attention. Usually, she was the one lecturing others. The officers continued inspecting the Jeep quietly, their voices too low to hear from a distance. Every now and then, one of them would call out a code or note something they observed. Finally, the lead officer walked over to the woman. "We need your statement next," he said. "After that, we'll take photos of the tools you used." She blinked rapidly. "Tools? I only used, well..." She looked down at the slim metal tool she still held in her hand. Without realizing it, the officer extended his hand. "We need to collect that." She hesitated, then slowly placed it in his palm. He put it inside a clear evidence bag. "Why are you treating this like a crime scene?" she whispered, her voice trembling now. "Because tampering with this vehicle is not a small matter," he replied. "And you tampered with it." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would defend her. But the neighbors watching only looked stunned. No one stepped forward. The officer then turned back to the owner. "We checked the interior. Everything seems intact except for the steering lock she damaged. Is that a serious issue?" the owner asked. "It's not something we can ignore," the officer replied. "We'll need to replace it and file this incident with our main office." The woman looked like she wanted to disappear. Her shoulders slumped. Her usual loud, bold energy was gone. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quietly. The officer didn't soften his voice, but he didn't raise it either. "Intent doesn't change the fact that you broke into secured equipment." The woman looked at the ground. Her clipboard hung loosely at her side now. The wind rustled the papers clipped to it, but she didn't fix them. The lead officer walked a few steps away, speaking into his radio. Another officer approached the owner again. Do you have footage of her breaking the lock? He asked. He nodded. I started recording when I saw her trying to force it. We'll need a copy for the report. He agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, the woman whispered toward him, her voice trembling. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say this Jeep was special? He looked at her calmly. Because I didn't have to. You shouldn't have touched it at all. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She seemed to finally understand that no matter how she tried to explain or justify her behavior, the damage was done. After a few more minutes of examination, the officers began organizing their equipment. The lead officer returned. We finished the initial assessment, he said. We'll need to take both statements now. You first, he told the owner. He gave a final look at his Jeep, still intact, except for the damaged lock, and followed the officer a few steps. Away to answer questions. The woman stayed near the Jeep, staring at the broken lock inside. She looked smaller somehow, like the situation had finally weighed down on her. The neighbors who had been watching slowly drifted back into their houses, but not before whispering among themselves. They had never seen someone from their neighborhood in this kind of trouble before. One of the officers approached the woman once the owner finished his statement. Your turn, he said. She swallowed hard. Do I need a lawyer? You can choose to have one, he replied. That's up to you. But we still need your statement for our report. She nodded weakly and followed him. While she spoke with the officer, the lead officer approached the owner again. Everything will be handled through the proper channels, he said. We'll document the damage, file the report, and contact you once the review is complete. The owner nodded. Thank you. The officer gave a small nod in return. You did the right thing calling us. I didn't call, he said. The alarm called you. The officer gave a faint smile. Same result. The woman finished her statement and stood quietly on the driveway, staring at nothing. She looked overwhelmed, like someone who had built a world of strict rules and suddenly realized she wasn't the one in charge. The officers returned to their vehicles, loaded their equipment, and prepared to leave. Each SUV pulled away one by one, calm and controlled, leaving the street quiet again. For a moment, the woman and the owner stood in silence. The morning air felt heavy again, but in a different way now, like the neighborhood would never forget what had just happened. The woman finally spoke, barely above a whisper. I didn't know this would happen. He looked at her evenly. You didn't listen when you should have. That's what happened. She lowered her head, unable to argue. When she walked away, her steps were slow and unsteady, nothing like the loud, confident strides she was known for. The man watched her go, knowing this was only the beginning of what she would face. And though the officers were gone, their presence still lingered in the air, leaving everyone to wonder what would happen next. The moment the officers left the driveway, the whole street slowly started to come back to life. Curtains that had been slightly open quickly snapped shut as people pretended they hadn't been watching. A few neighbors who had been peeking over their fences quietly stepped back, pretending to water plants or sweep floors they had already cleaned. But even with everything calming down, the person at the center of it all felt far from calm. He stood beside the Jeep, staring at the broken lock the HOA woman had destroyed. The metal still dangled uselessly, and every time he looked at it, a tight feeling grew in his chest. It wasn't anger anymore, at least not the sharp, burning kind. It was something quieter, heavy, the kind that sits inside your ribs and reminds you that someone crossed a line they had no right to cross. He knew the Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It held files, markings, and modifications that weren't for public eyes. Even if the main sensitive equipment wasn't inside today, the Jeep was still a tool used by people who trusted it would be protected. And now, someone had busted it open, like it was a toy left in the wrong backyard. He took a slow breath, and touched the side panel, tracing the fingerprints she had left behind. They were smudged and messy like she had grabbed the Jeep in a hurry with no thought at all. It made him wonder what she had been thinking. What could have pushed her so far that she thought breaking into someone's vehicle was normal? Before he could let his thoughts spiral further, the familiar sound of footsteps approached from the sidewalk. He looked up and saw his neighbor, the older man who lived 2 houses down, walking toward him. "You all right?" the man asked quietly. His voice carried the kind of concern that wasn't nosy, just human. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just trying to figure out what comes next." The older man gave a small, understanding smile. "I saw everything. Hard not to. She just acted like she owned the whole street." He gave a small, tired laugh. "She always does. But this time was different." "Different how?" the neighbor asked. He hesitated. He couldn't share everything, not the real reason the Jeep mattered, not the department it belonged to, and definitely not what the officers had said. But he could share enough. "Let's just say her mistake reached the wrong people," he answered carefully. The neighbor nodded like he understood, even if he didn't know the details. "Well, if you need anything, tools, help fixing the lock, or just someone to talk to, I'm around." That simple offer meant more than he expected. "Thanks, really." The neighbor gave a warm pat on his shoulder and headed back to his house. Watching him go, he felt something settle inside him. Not peace exactly. More like clarity. This wasn't going to just go away. And he couldn't let it. He grabbed his toolbox from the garage and started inspecting the broken lock more carefully. But his mind wasn't on the repair. He knew he could replace the lock easily. His thoughts were on the HOA meeting scheduled for the next day. He hadn't planned to attend. Most of the time, he stayed out of their arguments, rules, and petty drama. It was easier that way. But now things had changed. Someone tried to force their power onto him, and instead of checking themselves, they doubled down. They acted like they had the right dot as he tightened a bolt. He remembered the way she had shouted earlier, loud, sharp, confident, convinced she was in charge. She didn't even hesitate before breaking the lock. To her, it wasn't even wrong. It was routine. That thought hit harder than he expected. How many people had she done this to before him? How many families had she scared? How many times had she crossed the line simply because no one had challenged her? He didn't like that idea. By the time the new lock was in place, the sun had started to set. A soft orange glow spread across the street, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. Children's voices echoed faintly from a few houses. Someone was grilling a late lunch, and the smell drifted faintly on the breeze. But normal didn't return inside his mind as night came. He sat on his porch with a cup of tea, replaying the whole event over and over again. The flashing lights, the officers' faces, her shocked expression, and the whispers that followed, traveling fast through the neighborhood. He hadn't asked for any of this attention. If anything, he had built his life around being unnoticed, quiet, careful. It was safer that way. But now the spotlight had found him, whether he liked it or not. And the HOA woman? She was probably at home right now, pacing her living room, rehearsing excuses, or maybe even planning a way to twist the story so she didn't look guilty. He knew her type. She wouldn't admit she was wrong unless she was forced to. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. His thoughts drifted back to something the officer said before leaving. "Let us know if the HOA gives you trouble again. This isn't something we ignore." That sentence repeated in his mind like a steady drumbeat. It meant he wasn't alone in this. And that mattered. He finished his tea and set the mug aside, deciding to head inside. But halfway to the door, a soft sound caught his attention, a quiet tap against the pavement. He turned and saw a small envelope resting on the porch steps. No one was in sight. He frowned, picked it up, and saw that it didn't have his name on it, just a short, handwritten note. Meeting tomorrow. You need to be there. There was no signature. No clue who had left it. But the handwriting looked rushed. Like someone didn't want to be caught delivering it. He stared at it for a long moment. Someone wanted him at that. Meeting. Someone who didn't trust leaving the message through normal HOA channels. And someone who might know more about what really happened. He slipped the note into his pocket and stepped inside, locking the door behind him. The street outside grew quiet, but his mind didn't. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a simple meeting. It was going to be the turning point. And for the first time since the whole mess began, he felt a new kind of energy building inside him, steady, calm, and unshakable. He was ready to face whatever waited behind those HOA doors. And this time, he wasn't staying silent. The next morning arrived with a strange stillness hanging over the neighborhood. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet that usually came with early hours. It was the kind that felt like everyone was awake, but pretending not to be. Like the whole street was waiting for something to happen. He felt it the moment he stepped outside. The air was cool, and the sun had only begun to rise over the rooftops. Birds hopped along the fence, pecking the ground without a care in the world. Unaware of the tension humans had built up overnight, he locked his front door, slipped the mysterious note into his pocket again, and headed toward the small community hall where the HOA meetings were held. Normally, he avoided that building as much as possible. It was the source of rules no one liked, complaints no one asked for, and arguments that never solved anything. But today, for the first time since living here, he was walking toward it with a purpose. As he turned the corner, he saw a few neighbors already heading there. Some avoided eye contact. Some gave him small, supportive nods. And some stared at him with wide eyes, like they still couldn't believe what had happened yesterday. When he finally reached the community hall, he stopped at the door for a moment. The sound of low voices buzzed inside, people whispering, discussing, guessing. He took a breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The room fell quiet almost immediately. Every chair was filled. People stood along the walls, watching him walk in. At the front of the room sat the HOA board, and right in the middle was the woman who had broken into his Jeep. She sat stiffly, her chin lifted, pretending to be confident. But her fingers tapped nervously on the table in front of her. He walked to an empty seat near the middle and sat down. The room buzzed back to life again in soft whispers. A moment later, the HOA president, an older man with silver hair and a calm but tired expression, cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, tapping his papers into a neat stack. "Before we address new business, we have a serious matter from yesterday that must be discussed." Everyone's eyes shifted to the HOA woman. She crossed her arms tightly, staring at the wall instead of anyone in the room. The president sighed. "It was brought to my attention that a board member forcibly entered a resident's personal vehicle." A ripple moved through the room. Someone whispered, "Forcibly?" "She smashed the whole lock." Another said, "She always goes too far." Finally, someone caught her. The woman's jaw tensed, but she kept staring forward. The president continued, "This is not only a violation of HOA rules. It is a violation of basic respect and privacy. We need to address it." She finally snapped her gaze up. "I only did what needed to be done." His Jeep was parked an inch past the line, an inch. And it was blocking. It wasn't blocking anything. Someone interrupted from the back. "That's not the point," she shouted. "He breaks rules all the time, and no one says anything. I'm the only one trying to keep order around here." A murmur ran through the crowd, and he watched it quietly. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't even considering it. She was twisting this into something she could defend. He didn't speak yet. He wanted to understand where the room stood. The president raised a hand to quiet the noise. Even if the vehicle had been parked improperly, which, according to the officer's report, it was not breaking a lock, is unacceptable. You cannot take enforcement into your own hands. She turned sharply toward him, her eyes sharp and cold. He called the police on me. Over a lock. He sat up slightly. You broke into my property. And you didn't stop even when you realized what kind of vehicle it was. Some people leaned forward, listening more closely now. He continued, speaking calmly. The officers didn't come because I called them. They came because the department recognized the Jeep when you reported it. They came because it's not just a regular vehicle. The room filled with soft gasps. Her face turned pale. He didn't reveal details. He couldn't. But he didn't have to. The point was made. One board member leaned forward. You put this community at risk by tampering with something you shouldn't have touched. Another spoke up. We've warned you before about overstepping. This is not the first complaint. That line made her snap her head toward the board. Complaints? From who? A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down. Others looked directly at her with a courage they hadn't shown before. It became clear very fast that she had been doing things like this for a long time. He remembered the note in his pocket. He slowly reached for it and placed it on the table. I received this last night, he said. Every head turned. The president looked confused. Who wrote it? He shook his head. No idea. But someone wanted me here. Someone who didn't feel safe sending this through normal channels. A wave of whispers washed through the room. One woman in the back finally stood up. Her voice shook at first, but she held her ground. I wrote it, she said quietly. Everyone turned. She clutched her hands together. I didn't want to use the HOA email because she checks everything. She pointed toward the woman at the front. The HOA woman shot up from her chair. That is a lie. But the board member to her left cleared his throat. Actually, there have been reports about you accessing private messages. That caused an explosion of murmurs. The woman in the back continued, voice steadier now. I wanted him here because he deserved to speak for himself. And because someone had to stand up to her. The room fell silent. The HOA woman's face grew red with a mix of anger and embarrassment. The president leaned back and removed his glasses. I think it's time we vote on disciplinary action. Her voice cracked. You can't do this. I've served this community for 5 years. And in those 5 years, the president said softly, you've caused more conflict than harmony. The board held a quick discussion. It took less than a minute. When they turned back, the president spoke clearly and firmly. The board has decided to remove you from your position effective immediately. A stunned silence filled the room. Neighbors looked at each other. Some shocked, some relieved. The woman's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. You're making a mistake. All of you. She shouted. But no one said a word. No one defended her. She turned toward him, eyes filled with anger and disbelief. This is your fault. He met her stare calmly. No, this was your choice. For a moment, she seemed like she might scream again. But instead, she grabbed her purse, shook her head, and stormed out of the room. The door slammed behind her. The air settled. Slowly, the room relaxed. The president took a deep breath and looked at him. We're truly sorry for what happened. It shouldn't have reached this point. He nodded. Thank you. I didn't want trouble. I just wanted my property respected. We understand, another board member said. And going forward, we'll make sure the HOA stays within its limits. He appreciated that more than he expected. One by one, neighbors approached him after the meeting. Some apologized for not speaking up earlier. Some thanked him for finally exposing what many had been afraid to say. And a few simply shook his hand, offering quiet support. As he walked home, the air felt lighter. The tension from yesterday seemed to drift away. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel like he had won anything. What he felt was simpler relief, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been dealing with her for years. When he reached his yard, he paused to look around. The street felt different now, calmer, more balanced. His Jeep sat quietly in the driveway, the new lock shining under the morning sun. He touched the door lightly, as if closing a chapter. Then he went inside his home, letting the door shut gently behind him. The storm had passed, and for the first time since everything started, he finally felt at peace.